The Fundamental Magics, a story of discovery, intrigue, and rebellion. Chapter 1. The Faux Horn. The TMIS Oersted, deemed infallible by the fixtures who built it, was now at the mercy of the monstrous waves thrashing against her hull. It seemed this would be a journey as savage as the peoples we set out to help. I knew of their ancestry. I'd read the books, but nothing could have prepared me for those first steps onto their isle. Oversized flora grew in patches, untamed and unmanageable. Insects and arachnids, common in the motherland, were enormous, the weight of their exoskeletons threatening to crush the supple flesh beneath. It's no wonder that the explorers of antiquity thought themselves in a land of giants, or indeed that they had shrunk when arriving upon these shores. Though I will be remiss to keep meandering about the flora and fauna, for magic shall pique the interest of all. The building and landmasses here, I would come to find, sat at impossible angles. Temples floated as if buoyant in the air itself, the locals unbound by the fundamental force on which their school is based, gravity. Such a thing does not exist here, at least not in the natural sense. But upon my arrival, all I could see of their culture was a small outpost stationed at the dock, a tall cliff obscuring all else. Unnatural. I paused on the slab of rock, questioning its origin. These dinosaurs, Pangeans I believe is the current correct name, can trace their ability to manipulate gravity to the beginning of their ancestry, and they are beings of antiquity. The Pangeans vary more between individuals because of their unique evolution. They are hybrids. Any Pangean, although anthropomorphic, could exhibit one or two traits from any of the prehistoric lizards, their ancestors, that we know of today. One such Pangean greeted me as we docked. Their sex was indiscriminate to me, bearing a crested head and a back ragged with protrusions known as spines. I could comprehend the biology used to create such a creature, but if I were a man of weaker constitution, I would have lost consciousness. However, in juxtaposition to its appearance, the diplomacy and gentleness of its speech were courtly, and we exchanged pleasantries and observations on my arduous journey, despite difficulties in translation. Zakar was the name of the creature, the Pangean. He was in command of the isle. Breaking the ice with some small talk, the matter of my business here became the focal point of the conversation. Like their blood, the Pangean's temperament can be cold. It was his turn to be baffled, however. He knew little of our magic as I attempted to explain the fundamentals of electromagnetism. Unfortunately, my limited knowledge did not enlighten him. But it was not my duty to teach. I was here to create. A communication device, I explained to him, was my reason for being here. To plant the seeds of our culture's growth together, and bringing them into the modern world was my mandate. My presence on the isle was not uncontested, however. Many of the Pangeans stood against our so-called civility, and a gaggle of Newtonmancers had formed a not insignificant insurgent group. It seems we were lucky to avoid falling prey to Charbonian whirlpools created by their numbers. About 15 feet from the shore, the sheer cliff face stood. I craned my neck to see around it in either direction, but Zakar informed me that it loops around the entire island, with their settlement sitting atop. It is no surprise then that these peoples went undetected for centuries. Without their magic, it would be difficult to reach their country at all. When stepping off my boat, my feet hit the sand, and it would be no exaggeration to say that each individual grain vibrated against my feet. In the safety of my vessel, sight was the only sense communicating to me the scope of their magic. to feel it. It was a terrifying experience. The speed at which the car outpaced me and the difference between our gates showed me that the Pangeans' mastery of their magic trumped ours by at least tenfold. I followed the car, eager to begin my mission, with my pack of tools lighter in my arms. Be that excitement or Zakar's aid, I'll never know. I must say, I became used to the ground beneath me quickly, and could soon keep pace with my Pangean escort. The cliff face approaching us was monolithic. A single platform jutted out of the rock face, and upon further reflection, I could trace a faint discoloration from that point to the foot of the cliff. My observations soon ended with Zakar's gaze upon me, and a strange sense of anguish permeating the air. We reached a line of darker sand about 3 feet from the cliff, before Zakar spoke. "Stop there. Stand very still." Zakar's instructions froze me in my tracks, still unused to the sound of our language escaping a reptilian throat, and the broken way in which Zakar spoke. I realized at this point that it was indeed my language, if not accurate. A sense of shame washed over me, as I realized I had spoken a great deal upon our first meeting, and thought him dumb. Where these people learned it, I hadn't the faintest, and I had no time to query before Zakar threw his arms in the air, and the land beneath us rose from the ground, ascending the cliff face. In my homeland, we are all accustomed to moving horizontally, some even at rapid speeds. But now, a whole new access presented itself to me, guided by Zakar. My body repugitated the unnatural ascension, and it made me feel rather ill. I thought becoming accustomed to this was impossible. The world today indicates how naive I once was. As we ascended, our platform's circumference was tightening, packing us together such that the beating of his heart thumped against my own chest. Zakar lowered his arms, and our platform slowed. I struggled to contain my excitement as the platform reached its destination. I stood on my toes and craned my head to catch any glimpse just a second sooner. There was no anticlimax. The settlements of the Pangeans were beyond description, though I will do my best to convey them to you. The cliff-top civilization was akin to the heavens themselves. Wingless reptilian angels floated through the air, attending to gardens in the clouds and tilling run rigs stacked upon each other in one enormous tower of farmland. The air smelled of peat and sweat from the floating farms, mixed with a sweet aroma wafting from the flowers growing above my head. I ducked just in time to avoid a tailed club swinging from a Pangean passing overhead. I saw a grand staircase reaching into the sky, the top of it concealed by clouds. While I was stuck in appreciation, Zakar slinkered off and was no longer by my side. The wonder slowly drained from me, and I felt an immense sense of isolation as the only land-bound creature atop the cliff. It also dawned on me that I was the only one here endangered by potential energy. My tool bag pulled on my shoulder, its weight returning, reminding me of the job I had come to the isle to complete. Brought out of my bewilderment, I pressed on, deciding to head towards the singular building attached to the ground. The eyes of all the Pangeans around me were set on me as I progressed. The metallic door was large and heavy set, decorated with ornate leaves and shells from animals yet undiscovered to us. A sign above, no doubt identifying this building, bore calligraphic characters that I could only describe as alien, and a large insignia I would later discover was that of the insurgents shung on the stone. No other option presented itself. I raised my hand and knocked on the door. It rang with a powerful timbre. I raised my fist to knock again, but after a cacophony of stone and metal grinding together, I found my hand fell short. Unperturbed, I attempted to knock again, but could not find the strength to raise my fist higher than my waist. A scan of the rest of my body, and I came to understand that it was not fatigue that was keeping me from lifting my fist, but that the pull of my left hand towards the ground had increased tenfold. I could no longer combat the pull, and my hand hit the ground with a crunch that I knew meant injured bones. I was at the mercy of foreign gravitational force. My mind settled. Careful not to twist my arm, I sat down on the rocky floor. Struggling would waste my time. I needed a plan. As I sat, the crowd of Pangeans around me snickered. Flashes of a distant childhood memory flooded my mind. The stocks in the middle of our town, clamped using electromagnets. And then it came to me. On instinct, I took up the proper stance, limbs straight and feet anchored to the ground. I outstretched my free hand towards the door and strained my mind to visualize the switch. The group of Pangeans ceased snickering and surrounded me, their monocular eyes fixated in curiosity. I stopped visualizing. Hope that ripping the door from its hinges wee enough left my body. It would not. I cursed myself for leaving my rings aboard the ship. I could feel the intense gravity pulling at my left fist increase, and I knew I had to deal with this situation soon. I winced in premonitory pain, beginning the visualization process again. The switch flipped, and the familiar, almost unpleasant tingle of current flowed through me. I tilted my head straight, and I heard the swaying of my earrings. I pulled my hand back, and the door came with it, attracted to magnetic force exuding from me. Inside, two Pangeans huddled. I had no time to observe them, as the current threatened to set me alight. I slammed the door to the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust which forced some Pangeans off me, and, careful to direct a sufficient amount in both directions, I sent most of the current into the stone below me, dissipating it into the insular material. As I had predicted, the Pangeans within the now doorless building approached me. I directed the remaining current still within me up towards my neck and into my head. The power burned, and I knew I would be in for a lengthy lecture when I returned home. But out of options, I channeled the current into my metallic earrings. They glowed with incandescent light. I raised my hand to my head and attracted the now charged earrings to it. They ripped from my ears with a physical tear, and the floor beneath me stained with blood. A flick of the wrist later, and the two Pangeans lay subdued, and my earrings sat shining, no longer glowing. My left hand was free. I walked over to collect them, not daring to push my limits. And now, in this moment of levity, I could finally analyze my aggressors. One bore a long neck atop its otherwise humanoid body, and the other had a sharp and cracked horn protruding from its face. In the blood pooling at my feet, a familiar reflection manifested. Zakar had returned, a scowl dominating his face. I could never have expected the events that occurred in the following minutes. I hung my head in shame for using my magic outside my prerogative, knowing that a claim of self-defense would not fly in front of the council, or indeed here with Zakar. As a member of the Positive Charge Guild, I was under no circumstances permitted to use my magic outside of construction or repair, especially on peoples of C rank or lower. A measure of fear joined the concoction of emotions brewing inside me, as the notion of expulsion came to mind, eradicating all hope of one day achieving my goals. I almost laughed at my folly. There had not been a new majestic influence appointed since Zagreb the Forked cast away his remaining organic components and became his majestic influence, Ohm the Resistor. And today, I had almost cast away my chance of joining their numbers. But to my surprise, my feet remained planted on the cliff. I apologized to Zakar as I stood in front of him, expressing my remorsefulness. However, Zakar stalked my assailers and helped them to their feet. His chin pointed towards me, and another rumble escaped his throat. Use magic, not this way, for betterment. The assailers grunted back in what I could only assume was native profanity. Same language, reply. Good manners, came the response from Zakar. The two who had attacked me, Bratchery and Nick, as I later learned, scowled at Zakar and contorted their mouths trying to speak my language in retaliation. What escaped was a garbled mess of noise that to me was indiscernible. But by some miracle, Zakar understood and replied to them with serenity. This is a reach, here to make a talkie station. I found the description of my monolithic task to be a tad reductive, but I did not even dare to breathe, fearful of breaking the trance Zakar had placed them under. Must help and learn. Progress. The last words Zakar struggled to summon. Progress. It was true that their majestic influences had commissioned this mission just for that purpose, as they had done with the Decayers in the north, the Finbacks in the west, and a great deal of other societies, magical or otherwise. I was here to help. Newtonmancy was not the only magic available to Zakar. It seemed as if his words, with their own power, had somehow pacified the two, at least to some extent. This didn't keep them from spitting at the floor by my feet as they left, towards the grand staircase, and disappearing from view. Zakar wheeled around to me, and I knew now it was my turn to be reprimanded. Bratchery, Anik, no unity, but Pangean good, no fight. His crustaceous gaze broke me from my rumination. I'm sorry, I told him. This is your jurisdiction, not mine. My apology seemed to placate the Pangean before me, and he clapped his arms to his crest in what I understood as a sign of respect. Come. Zakar turned on his heels and walked away, leaving me to gather myself and run after him. I matched his pace, walking in tow with him, but not before looking into the building Brackery and Nick had ambushed me from. Larger inside than dimensions allowed, an altar sat at the back, below an ornate tapestry depicting 4 orbs falling towards a planet. I rubbed my eyes. The room had become mundane, the altar gone. Zakar was leading me toward the stack of farmland reaching into the sky, roots and worms poking out of the bottom. Pangeans floated upwards to tend to their crops, before a sudden roar shook me. Similar to the Pangeans in biology, the creature was far more primordial. It stood about 6 feet tall, had sharp claws and teeth, and a tail that trailed behind it. It roared again as 4 Pangeans surrounded it and forced a bridle in its mouth, attached to thick, fibrous reins. To my astonishment, one of the 4 floated upwards and settled themselves on the back of the creature, before snapping the reins and riding through the field, throwing seeds as they went. The 3 remaining Pangeans walked away, their tranquility in complete opposition to the cryptid they had just domesticated. With no opportunity to come to terms with what I'd just seen, Zakar grabbed my arm and directed me into a small shack underneath one of the floating mounds, its roof scraping against the rock and dirt. Inside, an assault on my ears and eyes took the form of a restaurant. Culture shock hit me with a massive weight, as if the Pangean culture itself had used the same gravity magic of its people. In the kitchen, a tall pillar of flame billowed, central to everything else. Pangeans in tall hats levitated large vegetables and crops nearer and nearer the flame, cooking them using magic. There were no servers. A shrill ring echoed throughout the claustrophobic shack, and a grunt from a stout Pangean with a thick, domed skull and arms that touched the floor for a lack of length on her legs alerted the punters whose meal was ready to be floated over to their table. I had my work cut out for me, trying not to get covered in soup, spilling from flying bowls. Zakar swaggered towards a kitchen-side table, and I noticed he seemed to have lost a fair amount of his girth. His bones fought against layers of fat, muscle, and scale to see the world outside of his body, their victory imminent. At the table, 2 Pangeans stood, bowed, and made themselves scarce, allowing us to sit in privacy. I sat in awe as culinary techniques alien to me took place before my eyes. A large bowl of soup, fried vegetables, and a pie stuffed with grass later. Zakar spoke. Use magic, cost mass. Need much food? No mass? He paused again, searching his mind for the words to convey to me the restrictions of his people's magic. Death. At his words, I almost choked on a thick, root-flavoured drink whose name I could not recount to you if I tried. It was in that provincial restaurant of all places that my worldview was altered. Electromagnetism was not the only school of magic that was dangerous to its users. In a sudden rush of sepia-coloured nostalgia, I returned to my time in the academy. The computerized teaching aids, all of which linked with their majestic influence in education, Wattlia's networked mind, been given a lecture on the 4 schools of magic that ruled this world. Newtomancy, decay, fusion, and, of course, electromagnetism. The crux of the lecture was this: our magic, electromagnetism, puts its users at significant risk and demands caution. The other schools pose no risk to their users. This fundamental difference, this need for caution, is what allowed us to advance beyond them. But now, on the Isle, here with Zakar's people, we finished eating. Zakar's people must have had a fantastic metabolism, for his roundness swallowed his bones once again. He stood and escorted me out of the restaurant into the comparative silence outside. Time had absconded from me in there, for dusk was already sprinting towards us. Once again, I followed Zakar, eager to find my lodgings for the remainder of my extended stay. The following day, I woke in bemusement. My unconscious had formed images of 4 glowing orbs hitting a petri dish and forming land masses in the solution. When I entered the wakened world with full consciousness, I took note to return to the Orimancer's office upon my return to the homeland. For now, though, I took in my lodgings with fresh eyes. I was on the 2nd floor, and a hole in the floor sat by my feet. The lack of stairs did worry me, though a long rope dangled through it. Zakar's best attempt, I supposed. The rest of the room was quaint, if not simple. Grass and leaves hanging in a net made up my bed, and a large hole gaped in the wall on the other side by the door. I walked over and looked through, taking in the surrounding scenery. I thanked the influences that I had kept my eyes closed in the flight in. The thought of Zakar's thinning body and dizzying vertigo had made me quiver. I grabbed hold of the fabric to steady myself and lowered myself to the floor below. Zakar stood there, towering in the small room we found ourselves in. Entranced, he stared at a map attached to the wall, and it took me some time to extract him from his inner thinkings. I led him to sit on a chair in the corner and sat opposite him, looking at the map before I broke the ice. "I don't recognize any of these islands," I said, confused at the alien coasts and borders the map bore. "Pangean settlements," Zakar told me. "In past, 1. Now many." I communicated understanding, and felt anything but. I made the 2nd note to myself of the day. Reread the history books. Zakar and I sat together for an age while I explained to him the specifics of the project I was here for. It took a while for him to grasp how this machine would work, but once he did, we began building. On the 3rd day, Zakar's homestead now looked like a scrapyard. On the 5th, my crew finally left the Oestead and joined us on top of the isle, working on the machine with us. On the 7th day, disaster struck. It was a fine morning on the isle, the sun beating through the holes in the wall as Zakar and I waited for my companion and second-in-command, Sophia, to arrive with a crucial component for the machine. Hours passed, and my patience was running thin when, not Sophia, but Florence, entered the hut, escorted by none other than Braccieri. A mole working within the insurgency under Zakar. Becoming tired of the clandestine life and constant guilt of lying to his sister, he'd given it up and instead came to our aid. "Anik's really gone and done it now," Braccieri exclaimed. The speed that he had learned our language baffled me, outpacing Zakar and the other Pangeans who had been learning it for years. The fellow was a natural. A place in the homeland rested on his ability to learn formality, but influences know his immense prodigiousness would be an asset. I listened as Braccieri retold the events of the morning. Anik, it seemed, had ambushed Sophia while she was bringing me the last component needed to complete my machine, and was now holding her hostage. I attempted to subdue my feelings at the news, but that was an impossible endeavour. I cackled, showing confusion with all who were present. Oh, if Anik thinks she has Sophia hostage, a nasty surprise will befall her. The situation is quite the opposite, I spoke, through laughs and tears, as the thought of Anik attempting to intimidate Sophia, only to be met with brutal nonchalance. After all, Sophia was, at one point, my personal bodyguard. A rough, female scream echoed throughout the settlement, dreading my confidence. I turned to the whole wall with growing anxiety. Sophia was never in danger. But could it be? Moving without thinking, I grabbed Bracciary and threw us both through the hole. We fell for far too long, for Bracciary nullified gravity's pull on us. I directed him to take us to where the scream had come from, and we floated towards a warehouse nestled on a Ciro's platform. Within 10 minutes, we had landed, and placed a foot onto the cloudy surface, apprehensive that it might fall through. I was unsurprised, though, that it held my weight. A further scream echoed through the sky, seeming to bounce off the air itself. We ran towards the door, but a wall of force knocked me back. Bracciary and I stood, confused, and my heart palpitated in an extreme cocktail of nervousness and altitude. We could not enter the building. It was then that a shadow cast itself over us, blocking light from the sun. That silhouette I recognised without a doubt. Zakar descended onto the clouds. He grunted to Bracciary, using their language to keep me in the dark, and he marched towards the entrance. The wall gave way to him, and he walked unobstructed into the warehouse. When I tried to follow, Bracciary barred my entrance. I quickly realised that protesting was a hopeless endeavour, as Bracciary was steadfast in his loyalty to Zakar, as he was immovable. Anik is our responsibility, Bracciary tried to comfort me, in his uncanny rendition of my language. Zakar will deal with her. So it was that we sat on the clouds, awaiting Zakar's return with Sophia. Raised voices of confrontation escaped from inside, but never the sounds of battle. Eventually, Zakar returned to us, with Sophia laid over his shoulder. To say she was in a bad way would be a disservice to her torture. It was as though she had bathed in blood. Bruises peppered her body, which was contorted at unusual angles, her extremities rendered inoperable. Yet, as expected, she had remained conscious. How Zakar had handled the situation, I would never know, met only with a wistful look into the distance, accompanied by silence. I never saw Anik leave that warehouse, and a strange sensation that she was not a handled threat loomed in the furthest clouds. At Zakar's homestead, we found Sophia's component damaged beyond repair. As protocol demanded, Florence and I joined hands and stood, shoulders touching. Florence waved her arms, mimicking sound waves as she channeled and produced the electromagnetic force needed to transmit my thoughts to the Oerstedt. Zakar and Bracciary were bewildered as I planned my message. My thoughts raced towards my forehead, barely contained by my dome. I felt them flow and convert into radio waves, pulsing towards the shore. Our formation wavered, and Florence placed her hands on the floor with care. The current dispelled from them, rounded by the rocks. We received word from the ship. It would take 5 years for a replacement component to come from the homeland. Depressing, the situation set in, stoked by Sophia's state. It took at least a month before motivation returned. Once she had healed, however, our walks around the settlement revealed to us that the Pangeans lacked many of the technological essentials of the homeland. And so, with nothing better to do with our time, we set about creating the technologies needed to improve the lives of our newfound neighbours. One of our people can revolutionize a country. 3 of us can work miracles. With Folderites, we created light bulbs. We created automated farming equipment for the Isle's farm tower. But, most importantly, and perhaps controversially, we built an Academy of Electromagnetism. By the time the component arrived, the Isle existed in the future. Houses had light in the darkness, and many of the newer generation had become disciples of a most sacred magic. Zakar had found a wife and sired a child. Trippy was his name. He would become our most prestigious student. It was fortuitous that both Zakar and Brachi were in our camp, for without their mastery of Newtonmancy, Zanchu, as I discovered the Pangeans called it, the components wouldn't have made it to us. Even after all we did for them, though, entire clusters of homes remained unlit. Specialist farms emerged using only manual labour, and many students from the academy saw daily harassment. In the half-decade of our residence, there was one place we had yet to venture on the Isle. Zokar was its proper name. Atop the ornate staircase, cutting into the clouds, sat the main hall of the settlement. It was a hall with 3 tiers. 2 floors were public, being used for meetings and administration, and the top floor, shrouded in secrecy, had an exclusive clearance list. This uppermost floors of secrets was where we assembled the machine. We caravaned to the hall, the parts floating above us in high spirits, as we knew our arduous mission had finally neared its end. A strong sense of dread occupied me as I saw, as I often had, Anik's sharp, cracked horn moving through the crowd. But it vanished, as shadows do when sunlight burns them away. Her ghost haunted me, nothing more. I took Sophia's hand in mine and squeezed. She reciprocated, and everything that made up ourselves transferred through the circuit created by our locked fingers. Then, as the circuit broke, it was gone. Hours after our arrival at the hall, we made it through the ocean of bureaucracy. I joked to myself that it had been more tumultuous than our original journey here. The top floor was devoid of life, so we set about constructing the great machine. We were making history. The labour was great, but we worked together in uniform, and it wasn't long before the machine was ready. Sophia, Florence and I stole a moment for private celebration. Our mission had come to a close. Florence returned to the others, leaving Sophia and me alone. An intense moment of locked eyes passed before I looked away, cursing my cowardice. We two joined the group and primed the machine for its inaugural transmission. My hand shook as I raised it to the lever. I wrapped my fingers around it and, after a moment's hesitation, I pulled it down. Hope filled all present's bodies and grew to a collective amalgam of our aspirations for the future. We all, just for that one instant, became one. Despite our different races, genders, and ages, we all had one shared goal: unification. The top floor of the hall became open to the public, and crowds of Pangeans poured in. When the last Pangean arrived and the doors closed, the machine came to life. We waited as the components whirred, and static filled the screen set into the middle of the device. We waited, and waited, and waited some more. My mind drifted into rumination. Thoughts of guilt, failure, and doubt hit me all at once. But the picture grew until the great, majestic influence of communications came into view.
Majestic influence empire, responding to transmission from the IOC.
The first words cracked and squeezed through the speakers. The reach of the Positive Charge Guild reporting with the car of the Zokar settlement of Pangeans, known to us as the Ire. Ampere's face contorted in confusion, and I looked past them at the large number of others standing in the scene's background. For so long, I thought the machine was broken.
Zokar, we of the lands of electromedicine, Luxia, wish to meet you in good faith, and welcome you to our growing Imperial Alliance.
Conflicts played out on the faces of all the Pangeans present. With a breath, Zakar stood forward. It is my pleasure. The practice we had got over, upon Zakar's request, had paid off, and he could speak our tongue without hesitation. I represent those living here, and we thank you. Ampere's eyes lit up with a little too much glee, and a sudden sense of unnerving grasped me with cold, decrepit fingers. Ampere turned to the others in the room, addressing them.
Kill the died-out sword. AI race more advanced than we thought capable of.
Before they could finish, the sound of roars erupted in the chamber. We swiveled around, trying to locate the source, but the surprise and panic settled in, and the crowd pulsed in terror. The confusion sat heavy as Pangeans swarmed around us, restricting our view and forcing us to wade through the bodies. In the background, I could hear Ampere shouting and chatter from those behind them, but they didn't matter. I searched for Sophia with a fervour. I locked eyes with her, at the other end of the room. Pushing the other bodies out of the way, I approached her, and at last we embraced. I'm not embarrassed to say that I stole the kiss I should have earlier. Quiet befell the room. Everyone slowly settled and made their way out of the hall. We regrouped at the machine, and then it hit me. It wasn't just quiet. It was silent. My eyes darted to the machine, only to be met by an empty black screen and smoking parts. Despair filled me, and all else left my mind and vision. I slumped to the floor, ignoring the others running around behind me, offer condolences or fixes. I saw nothing. Except for one thing. A sharp, cracked horn sat on the floor in front of me. I picked it up, strange in my hands. With trepidation, I turned it, taking it all in. What I saw next elicited a gasp from my throat. A stretchy piece of fabric attached to the horn allowed someone to don it as a costume piece. The horn was fake. The horror realization bathed every one of my cohort's faces as I disseminated the faux horn. An imposter had infiltrated Zokar.